Sitting here with my old professor, Dr. Robert Kelly. Welcome to the David Ian Howe podcast. I've been in the field for a hot minute, so I haven't really posted much, but welcome to the new podcast. I'm going to start doing these whenever I can and post them here on YouTube and also put them on Spotify and iTunes and the whole deal. Again, I've been in the field for a month at the LaPrele Mammoth Site in Wyoming, and several of my former professors are here, including Dr. Robert Kelly, who I'm interviewing. Dr. Kelly is a brilliant man, like one of the most brilliant anthropologists out there. He wrote the book on hunter-gatherers. It's called The Foraging Spectrum, or also The Life Ways of Hunter-Gatherers is the new version. That is a book that, kind of overviews how humans operate on a landscape and how humans operate as zoological beings, but also as Homo sapiens at the same time, in the past, in the present, and in the future. It's awesome. And speaking of that, he also wrote a book called The Fifth Beginning. And in this book, it's an overview of human history, and he divides it into 5 beginnings, or 5 sections of time, that kind of show the progress of humanity as if somebody was watching it from the outside. And it's a quick, really easy read that you can read on a plane. And if you want a quick introduction to world prehistory, anthropology, and archaeology in general, this is the book for you. It's called The Fifth Beginning. I'll put the link here in the description. And one last thing, this is Wyoming, where we're filming this in the field, so it is windy and there's a lot of trucks on the highway behind us, so the sound kind of goes in and out. I put subtitles where those are, but the rest of the video is solid, and I hope you watch the whole thing, so thank you. This is episode 1 with Dr. Robert Kelly. You got your PhD at Michigan, correct?
Correct.
Undergraduate at Cambridge? No. Sorry.
Undergraduate at Cornell. My
Right.
master's from New Mexico.
New Mexico. And you were a Binford student?
At New Mexico, yes.
And then in Michigan, whose were you?
I worked under John Speth.
Okay. I should probably know that name. Anyway, well, my first question is, do you remember my lithics class presentation?
Your lithics class presentation on your Aero project.
Yes, you don't have to remember it, but...
I do remember it.
Okay. For those of you who don't know in the audience or listening, I wrote it in class. Well, I wrote half of it in class. The rest of it I did at home. But something was wrong with it, so I had to redo it all. And then it got to me, and I was like, I'm still writing it. You just, skipped me and went to the next person. And I did it, and it was an awesome PowerPoint. However, I did the coding thing I was doing for Todd's class, and I went to hit, the whole presentation predicated on me hitting this button that did all the stats, and it said error. And the grin on your face was one of my favorite memories of grad school. It's a good time. I think I did well. But anyway, that segues into my first question. What does it mean to be human, Bob?
Oh, I guess, we'll start with the simple stuff and work our way up. What it means to be human. For me, what sets humans apart from all the rest of the sentient organic life on the planet is that we have culture. We have the capacity to think about what life is supposed to be. We have the capacity to ask the question, what does it mean to be human? I don't think chimps ask themselves, what does it mean to be a chimp? But we can ask ourselves that question, and we become very concerned with that question, and different cultures have different answers to that question.
In your studies, what is one culture that sticks out to you that has a good answer to that question? Or an intriguing one to you?
I think all of them have intriguing answers. The one that you're brought up with seems the most obvious and rational, and well, of course, it's the right one. But that's the way everyone in the world thinks as well.
Yeah.
So, I suppose I was attracted to hunting and gathering societies because they certainly seem to be less interested in material things. I mean, they need certain tools and clothing and houses and so on, but those don't seem to be what's really important, right? They use a tool, it gets dull and worn out, and they throw it away, and that's what an archaeologist collects. For them, what was more important was people and relationships to people and maintaining good relationships between people. And I think that's one of the things that, even when I was very young, attracted me to the study of hunting and gathering societies. Now, they're not they're not the world's perfect societies. I've lost those sort of romantic notions of hunter gatherers, but I do think they have something left to teach us, and one of those is privileged people over everything else.
Fascinating. Okay.
Is that the answer you expected, David?
It's something interesting, at least. Yes, as close. Let me try to think here and segueing from that. What do you think? I mean, you're a hunter-gatherer anthropologist. You wrote the book on hunter-gatherers. We could nerd out all day about that too, and I'd like to. Do you think that hunter-gatherers are the ideal state for humanity?
I don't think there's any ideal state for humanity, because the conditions that humanity lives under changes all the time. So, we live in a world of we're pushing 8 billion people on the planet. This planet cannot sustain 8 billion people as hunter gatherers. Maybe a couple of tens of millions, if that, but not 8 billion people. We can't go back to hunting and gathering. Although if the apocalypse does hit, yeah, I imagine sales of my book will go through the roof.
Sure. I think we were talking about this the other day on the bus roof, but have always noticed in post-apocalyptic fiction, it always resorts to, not to say that it's band-level societies, but that's the most apt description of it, where people forage in small groups. In I Am Legend, Will Smith and his dog forage New York City, and he even has a little map pointing out where he's gone and foraged before, which would be his diet, not his diet breath, that would be his... I'm trying to think of the thing in like the hexagons that's in your book. The foraging radius?
The foraging radius, yeah. He's definitely has a foraging radius. There's only so far he can go.
Right.
Before he has to be back home before nightfall.
Right, yeah, from the zombie vampire creatures. Walking Dead as well. They always start out in a small band of people, and like there's a struggle to see who's the leader, and they have to forage. And I believe one season started with them like literally foraging for cat food, and that's all they could eat. And he was like, I can't do this anymore, we need to change. And they found a prison where they then started farming and had corn in there. And once that happened, lo and behold, another faction of humans comes to take that land because it's arable, you know. I always thought that was fascinating. Are there any other, like even in fiction or things like that, that you enjoy where anthropology is kind of screaming at you, but you can't explain it to your friends because you're going to interrupt them, kind of thing?
Because you're going to ruin the movie for them, yeah.
Yeah.
If people had to resort to foraging in like The Walking Dead, the problem there is that those point sources of food, like abandoned supermarkets, are not going to be replenished. Those are one-time supplies. So, and in the prison, was that second series, or season 2 or season 3? I can't remember.
I believe it was 2. Yeah, I stopped watching. But
they find some arable land inside a protected area because it's a prison. It's got a big fence around it, right?
Yeah.
So that's good to keep the zombies out. That's a point source of resources, and when that happens, that's when people have got two choices. We can either cooperate or we can compete. Movies always choose compete.
Sure.
Because cooperating would be boring as a movie, but it might very well be the option that people would take, and it's the option that they really ought to take as well.
Okay. I know you enjoy Firefly. I've been told that by many people. Is there something... I mean, something sticks out to me in that series that is anthropologically intriguing, but is there something to you that you enjoy most about that?
This one's coming from left field. Okay.
I have more.
I was as upset as everyone else when the series was canceled because it was just really well done. But they're also encountering, like every sort of space travel um, media presentation.
Sure.
They're running into other peoples, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they have to find some way to cope with those other people. Star Trek was the best at this. That's
Sure.
what it was really all about. And those programs, of course, are not designed to tell us here's how people ought to act. They're really designed to
Entertain.
grapple with the problems facing the world today.
Sure.
I think what the hunter-gatherers got by with problems with other people. The first way they did it was just by moving. And the world gets colonized after about 75,000 years ago, when modern humans will move out of Africa, and they eventually move across Asia, across the Bering Strait into North, Central, and South America. And I've often wondered whether one of the things driving that colonization process was not some colonization mindset like that of 16th century Europe,
right?
But it was really just them dealing with social problems. I can't stand my brother-in-law anymore, so I pack up and I move.
Yeah.
And I don't go back. So that's one way that they can do that, because there was all this land out there that there were no people. So they can move into new country. But the other way they do it is by finding ways to, what do the Bushmen say? Cool their hearts. Find ways to cool people's hearts. So if somebody starts trying to act very important, they have various ways to let that person know you're getting too big for your britches. And
Gotcha.
They cool their hearts, right? So a hunter who brings in a nice fat, antelope, they start telling him, that's awful. That's the worst animal I've ever seen in my life. It's terrible. They don't want them to get to as the Bushmen say, if somebody starts thinking themselves real important, the next thing you know, they'll kill some.
Okay.
So they always have these leveling mechanisms to kind of bring people down. They have leveling mechanisms to make sure that goods get widely circulated around a camp. I remember Richard Lee telling the story about young Jikwazi men in Botswana would go off to work in the town, and when they came back, they had all this stuff, right? Clothes and things that they had bought in the big city, and within 24 hours, it's sort of, they've got none of it. It's all gone out to everybody, everyone else.
Interesting.
So those personal possessions, having those things, is not as important as having them in order to give them away. Okay. Because you build all these relationships by sort of giving stuff away. So being generous becomes a very important personal attribute.
Okay. So would you say that most, or not most, but like, is it a tendency of foraging societies to be more communal and more like fraternal, I guess, in that sense, or more prone to sharing with each other?
I don't really know what communal might mean in this case.
Sure. I guess I'm thinking like a potlatch. Something like that.
Potlatch gets to be a little bit different because those are sedentary hunter-gatherers. They're ones living under population pressure, and things change in that case. In the potlatch, it's considered to be run by one individual. It takes a whole village to do the potlatch, but it's really done in order to show the prestige and power of one individual on behalf of his village. And I say his because I don't know of any potlatches that are run by women. There may well have been in the past. But, and those potlatches, it's usually done by a big village that invites a smaller village in. And the message that they're communicating to this smaller village by giving them all these things, food, but also blankets and canoes and all sorts of things, is a way to signal to that other village, don't even think about messing with us.
Gotcha.
Because we're bigger and more powerful than you are. And it's all manifested in this potlatch. And the one man who's doing it is communicating, all these people here, they're all behind me. They all back me. Don't mess with this village. We will act as one against you. And that's really the purpose of a potlatch. It's competitive feasting. It's a way of demonstrating we are more powerful than you are.
I never really saw it like that. I guess I kind of always saw it, and maybe I just didn't read it right, but which is probably apt. But like trading food and showing people, like, you owe me this because I've showed you this kind of. They're like, it's a public forum in which people see what you owe each other. Or am I thinking of something different?
No, it's when you hold a potlatch, you are expected to return it.
Okay.
At some point in the future. So the way the a high-ranking man in say, Kwakwakkwak village gets to hold a potlatch is he's holding all these smaller potlatches for all these other men in the village. And those men are expected to return the potlatch, and they have to give back the same amount of stuff that he gave them, plus a little bit more. I mean, it's straight up investment banking. So when this powerful man now has enough stuff, he holds this potlatch for this smaller village. And that smaller village is expected to return it. But that smaller village will never be able to. Okay. They're too small. So they are forever sort of told, you have less prestige than this village. Because they can't return that potlatch. It's a competition.
Wow. That's fascinating. I never really thought of it like that.
It goes on at lots of different levels in all kinds of societies. It's a way of sending a message out. This is how powerful we are.
Yeah.
Why would a country parade all of its military weapons out? Because they know it's all being broadcast to the rest of the world, and it's a way for them to say, don't mess with us. Look what we have.
Right. Do we have a modern day interpretation of that? Or a modern day example of that?
Doing just that. Military parades.
Like a Russian May Day parade kind of thing.
Yeah.
North Korean.
Their purpose is to communicate to the world, this is what we have, this is how powerful we are. Don't mess with us.
Fascinating. Okay. I'd like to move on now to, are you allowed to talk about the new art project?
Sure, why not?
Okay. So I understand you're going through and finding the oldest evidences of, human expression or like a modified art in some sense, or what would be your definition of that?
It's like, what is art, right? There's an easy question.
Yes, let's go with that one.
What is human? We did what is human, so yeah. What is art? Why not? When I wrote my book, The Fifth Beginning, I did a lot of reading in an area that I wasn't very familiar with, which dealt with the origins of the human capacity for culture.
Right.
And culture is this abstract understanding of the world, of what life is supposed to be like, of what your men are supposed to do, what women are supposed to do, what you're supposed to do as an old person, what is a wealthy person supposed to do. All these sorts of things about how life is supposed to progress, right? And culture constantly has this conversation with itself about, is that really what life is all about? Because what you think life should be is never what life actually is, right? Life should be long and happy and pleasant, and life is often short and miserable and horrible. So there's this mismatch between, always a mismatch between what we think life should be and what life actually is.
Yeah.
So culture is this constant conversation about that. And then it can get especially complicated when you start having hierarchical societies and somebody's commenting on, life is supposed to be egalitarian. Why am I a poverty-stricken peasant while there's a wealthy king? So art is all a way to kind of talk about that.
Gotcha.
And it always is. It always has been a way to kind of talk about life and our dissatisfaction with it, and trying to show that the king is wearing no clothes, right?
Sure.
So I assumed that once people became cultural, the production of what I call artifacts of symbolic expression. That's to get around the word art, right? But they're just artifacts whose it appears that their primary purpose is to communicate some kind of meaning. I don't know what the meaning is.
Could it have just been a doodle?
It could be.
Yeah.
But even those have meaning to them.
That is very true. Yeah. You were bored.
So I wanted to know when did this capacity appear, and also what was its trajectory over time once it appeared. Well, what we had to do, we wanted to look at the distribution of these artifacts of symbolic expression over time, from about 40,000 years ago back as far as we could.
Mm-hmm.
As you go back further and further in time, some of these objects become harder to convince yourself that they're actually something, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
like striations on a seashell or something like that.
Something like that. You just don't. Is that symbols at work, or is that somebody using a seashell as a sort of working surface to cut meat, and they cut through the shell, right? It gets hard to interpret some of this stuff, but the question that a number of people were interested in was this peak in the Aurignacian period in Europe. And there's this, appears to be this massive jump, this rapid jump in the production of these kinds of objects. This is the time of about 45,000 years ago. People were producing these wonderfully cute little ivory figurines, little mammoths and little bears and waterfowl and all these different little animals, and they're only a couple of inches long, right? I've seen many of these. And then there's the lion man, about 40,000 years old, found in a cave in southern Germany.
It's like a figurine or like a
stands
statue.
Stands about 30 centimeters tall.
Yeah.
Carved out of ivory, and it's half human, half lion. So what's that all about? I don't know, and I'm not sure I ever will know, but I do know it's about something. Sure. Right? There's some meaning there. And we get lots and lots of that in the Aurignacian, right? People have called it the creative explosion. But other people have said, look, you find similar kinds of objects going back further and further in time, maybe back to 200,000 years ago, if not earlier. And they said the reason you have this peak at 40,000 years ago is because of the destruction of the archaeological record due to natural processes. Rivers wash sites away. They get deeply buried beneath the volcanic ashes and alluvium that rivers deposit. They get destroyed through decomposition, because many of these objects are not in stone. They're in ivory, they're in bone, they're shell, marine shell, or ostrich eggshell. Right. Ostrich eggshell beads are very, very common in Africa. These organic mediums, which can last a long time, but they do eventually decompose. So some people said the reason you have that peak in the Aurignacian is because of this loss of the earlier archaeological record through destruction of sites or through decomposition.
So it's a taphonomic issue.
This is what we call a taphonomic problem.
Okay.
So, but they just left it there. They just said, well, if you hadn't had this destruction, instead of this peak in the Aurignacian, you probably have a ramping up. More and more and more stuff. Starting about 200,000 years ago, you'd get a ramping up to the Aurignacian. Or you'd get a peak very early, 200,000, and then it basically plateaus, right? You've got just as much production 200,000 years ago as you have 40,000 years ago. So the answer is to take the record and correct it for taphonomic loss, which we can actually do in a crude, simple way, but we can do this. So the first thing I had to do was compile all the data on these artifacts of symbolic expression, along with some estimates of their age ranges, because some of them can't be dated precisely, but they can be dated precisely to a 2,000-3,000 year period. So we compiled all of those records. There's about 240 odd of these, of ones that we could date and ones that I considered to be artifacts of symbolic expression. And I tried to use a very liberal definition of that. And we were then able to kind of mathematically correct the distribution over time of these objects for taphonomic loss. And the answer is that the Aurignacian peak is still there. Even after you've corrected for taphonomic loss, that peak is still present. So there's something going on primarily in Europe about 45,000 years ago. And that's probably the encounter between modern humans moving out of Africa and the Neanderthals who were already in Europe.
I have something I've wanted to ask you for a while, since I figured this out, and I just haven't had the medium to ask you, but it goes right into what you just said. I recently learned a guy had a surgery on his brain, and everything went well. And when he went, this isn't a joke. It sounds like I'm talking about a joke, but he goes to the doctor, and the doctor is like, any complications? And he said, no, I feel fine. However, I can't see anything anymore. And he was like, well, you're not blind. And he said, no, like in my head, I can't see anything. And the doctor looked this up, and apparently it's called aphantasia. And there's some people that cannot process mental images where others can. So the test would be, and you guys can all do this too, if you close your eyes and like try to picture an apple, if it's like in 4K, like you don't have that issue. If like it's kind of blurry, you might not. And if it's black, like I don't see anything, you have aphantasia. So like I think in like, this gets all woo-woo, but I think in like thoughts and feelings, I don't have like images, which is why I love working with that artist, because I'm like, I want an Aurignacian man in a hyena cave with his dog, and like he just spits it back at me. Like, I've never pictured that before in my life, and now I know why. So I wondered, I love handprints. Like I stare at them all the time. I was painting them over there, I have the tattoos and stuff, and like they just fascinate me. And I met another person who also had this thing too. She had reached out to me on Instagram when I talked about it, and she showed me her paintings in her house, and she had handprints, and she was also obsessed with them. And I wondered, is it at that time period where maybe what I have is vestigial, and what modern humans have, not that I'm not modern human, but, you know, we still have some vestigial things, is that click, and, like, they start painting things all over the walls because they can see it. And my artist said that he can go, if I want a Clovis landscape and, like, paint that, he told me he can sit there, manipulate that whole image in his head, change the lighting, add more animals and things, and he gets frustrated because he can't paint it as well as he sees it in his head. And I'm like, dude, you're amazing. And he's like, no, it's not perfect yet. It had me thinking, I have to create things because, like, I have to make videos, I have to paint because I can't see it in my head in a way. And apparently you can kind of train yourself to get there, but I've been working on it. But like counting sheep and things like that, I didn't realize people actually did that. I thought it was just metaphorical. And like picture yourself on a beach. I don't see it. It's just like my teachers would like do it. I don't see it. I just thought everyone else was kind of like making it up. So I wondered, is that what happens then? Because some people do have it. I think it's 1% of the population. And apparently people that have it are always very analytical, and they're more data driven, which I thought was interesting. You remember facts. Does it have to do with modern humans? I don't know, but
It the in the fifth beginning, I argued that once that any population that's cultural and that's using symbols to communicate and is capable of using symbols to communicate, and we communicate with symbols all the time. We can look at someone's clothing, and we're going to make some decision about them. It may be the wrong decision, right? Oh, that person's dangerous. That person's really weird. It may be completely the wrong decision, but there is an automatic link made between the way someone looks and how we're going to think about them, right?
Mm-hmm.
And oh darn, I forgot what I was going to say.
You're good.
There are some people who have that capacity in spades, right? They've got the capacity is on a bell curve, and they're out here at the far end of the bell curve. That the only way they can sort of deal with the world is through some kind of manipulation of symbols. It might be art, painting, it might be sculpture, it might be music,
Writing.
it might be writing.
Yeah.
All these artistic pursuits that somebody can't seem to handle the world except through that vehicle, and they can't seem to do anything except that. So someone like Beethoven, who could hear music when he was stone deaf, right? He could still hear it and write it down because he could see it. He knew exactly what those notes. He could hear the music that he was writing down in his head. I play a little piano. I can't do that. I can't do that. So you're always going to have people like that, and they're at some point they're going to probably recognize I'm different than other people. I see things in a different way. I really have got this mania about painting hands on the cave wall, and other people are going to go, "What the heck is Joe up to? What?
Yeah,
he's painting his hands again. What? I don't get it."
Yeah,
and they don't get it, and Joe doesn't get why they don't get it.
Sure.
But those are individuals who usually become shamans. They're the ones who are really questioning why do I think about the world this way and no one else seems to think about the world the way that I do.
Yeah.
Those are the people who become shamans.
Fascinating. Put a pin in that because I have more questions on that. But I went to the Met in New York.
So I guess, David, you're a shaman, David.
Oh, I kind of assume that's what you were pointing to, but I guess we'll go into that one. I don't have schizophrenia, I'll say that. However, I have seen that there's a link between shamans, and they believe that it might have been like a schizophrenic kind of trance back in the day. Is there any like credence to that? Or
I suspect that some of the things that modern society considers mental illness has to do with this capacity for culture.
Sure.
And some people having like, I don't want to say too much of it or not enough of it.
So there's like a sweet spot.
There's a kind of sweet spot in the middle there.
Okay.
Where you can operate, but you can still sort of understand symbols.
Yeah.
I can go to the Louvre and look at paintings and sort of, discuss them and tell how they make me feel, right? My favorite artist is Hopper, because his paintings are always melancholy. Yeah. Oh yeah, the diner is just that's it, right?
Right.
Nighthawks. Yeah.
Is that what it's called?
Yeah.
Okay.
Nighthawks.
You guys know that one? Yeah.
That's probably Hopper's most famous painting. And that one's all about. It's really about him thinking about how can you be lonely and alienated in a city of several million people.
Yeah.
And that's a place where this is a mismatch. It doesn't make sense.
Mm-hmm.
So I suspect that our capacity for culture is also responsible for some of the things that we consider mental illness, because these are people who are operating with a capacity that's not quite like everyone else's.
Right. And I had gone to the Met in New York and saw Like I'd known Van Gogh before, like not him, but like I've been familiar with his work. And I saw like this painting, a self-portrait of his. It's like brown. He's got a straw hat on, and I was like drawn to it, and I couldn't figure out why. And my friend was like, "Are you ready to go to the next floor?" And I was like, "No, I want to see this painting a little more." And I stared at it, and it didn't click with me till like years later. He was painting depression. Friends and I discuss like anxiety and depression sometimes, and how it's kind of like a magnet, kind of sucks you into bed. You can't get up some days and stuff like that. That's what Van Gogh was painting to me, and like it clicked with me later, like, oh damn, that's what he was doing. And you can see how sad he is in the painting. And like when I looked more into Van Gogh, like he clearly had some, ended up cutting his ear off, and I think he took his life and whatnot. But yeah, you can tell, I guess, his art comes from a place of like no one understood his world, so the only way he could express that was through painting. And I was like, damn it, I get art. And it was kind of a cool moment. But I guess Hopper was that for you, or something similar?
I guess I like melancholy stuff.
Yeah. Okay. I guess from there, I had another question in regards to art. I'll edit this down. Oldest art. Oh, so yeah, in your opinion, what is the oldest art?
In our database, the oldest artifact that's used in the database are the roughly 130,000-year-old white eagle talons from, I'm going to embarrass myself and get this wrong. I think they're from Krapina Cave in Croatia. Does anyone know if I've got that right or wrong? No? But they're eagle talons that were clearly all sort of cut off, and it looks like they were designed to be tied onto maybe a necklace. And it's a number of them. I forget how many. Not just two. It's a number of white eagles that they had to go and kill, and it's that's not an easy bird to kill.
Yeah.
So you really have to go out looking for it. What those things mean, I don't know. But they had some kind of meaning, which is why they're in the database. They're an artifact of symbolic expression.
And that's different than like a European cave panel or something classically art.
Classically art.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can all look at that and go, oh, that's art.
Right.
Although it's really hard for us to know what it means. Although you can look at modern art and go, I
don't know.
I look at Jackson Pollock's and I go,
someone had diarrhea on a canvas.
I don't know what that's all about.
Yeah.
That was the oldest one that we included. There's probably some somewhat older things, but their dating becomes really problematic.
Mm-hmm.
But as you get back further than that, the objects themselves also, in my opinion, become more difficult to demonstrate that they're actually an artifact whose purpose was to communicate something symbolically.
Okay.
So, I don't see much before. I'll be generous and say I don't see much before about 200,000 that I can comfortably say is an artifact of symbolic expression.
And that's more or less modern human at that point.
Modern humans, based on sort of skull form, show up. Our archaic modern humans show up around 300,000 years ago, and then modern humans about 195,000 years ago. I mean, again, just biologically modern. Yeah. Modern humans. Yeah.
Okay. I'd like to get on to Laprell towards the end of this, but I do want to talk about... so I came to Wyoming to work with you, Todd, and Nicole. Nicole was Zoark, and we had read your hunter-gatherers book in my undergrad seminar. And Todd's work is also, it's like Paleoindians. But I'd also seen you, and I think the three of you, on a documentary I'd watched before, and it said University of Wyoming, and then Dave Anderson was like, you should go to Wyoming. And I was like, oh, I know those people. I learned a lot from you and Todd and Nicole when she was there about teaching and like speaking and educating. And that's, I think, the biggest takeaway I got from Wyoming, besides like the scientific part. I mean, I'm an anthropologist, but I enjoyed watching you lecture. I really enjoyed watching Todd lecture as well. And like everyone who gives presentations at Wyoming at WAS talks and stuff, it's like I'm always engaged. So, do you have any advice for people on how to teach, or like how? Because you've won advising awards and things like that. Like, what's your special sauce?
For public speaking, or
I guess just like education in general. Yeah.
I think anything that I do at all well, it's only because I either forced myself or I was forced by circumstances to keep doing it.
Okay.
So yeah, I want to be a professor. Yeah, I got to get up in front of classes and talk. And the first time I spoke in front of a class, I literally couldn't stop shaking.
Really?
I just shook and shook. It was terrifying.
Yeah.
So that doesn't happen anymore, fortunately. And I watched people who were good speakers, like Binford, who's a phenomenal speaker. He used to lecture to us for 5 hours, and we were still there. You know?
Yeah.
I mean, physically, but also mentally, we were still there. The night he went on to midnight, that was pushing.
Was that at a bar? I think I remember.
No, that was in the classroom.
Okay, that's some different story then.
Yeah.
I remember you telling me he bashed his window in with a shovel.
Yeah, his back window in his house.
to get into his
house.
To
get into his house. Yeah. The back door. He bashed the back door.
To get in, because he'd locked his keys inside, right? Or something, yeah. Cool. But yeah, I wouldn't have pictured you as somebody who shook when I mean, I guess we all got to start somewhere, but I always respect that you'd never say or like once. I don't know how you do it, and I listen to my voice sometimes, and I'm like, damn. And
I think I do that all the time, actually.
Really? I don't know. You're able to take a pause and like think sometimes, and I've tried to get there, but then I'm like stuck with my thoughts, and I have to just keep talking. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe you do say and like. I'll have to go through the back catalog.
You can edit those out. So
I can do that.
So it'll sound like I don't say those.
Yeah. Okay, so segue on to the last part. Last you and I talked about art. You had brought up the point of Clovis people, like, do they have art? Do we have any representation of it? And I think my answer was, like, we have Clovis points, and you said that's about it. They're probably too mobile to, have time for art.
There are some incised stones in the Clovis level at the Galt site in Texas.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is there any other
very
example?
Simple incised stones with cross-hatching. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any other examples? Or?
Well, there's a carved piece of bone from Florida, the Vero Beach site in Florida, which has a mammoth carved in it. I'm not sure that's it might be a forgery.
Oh, okay.
And I can't say that with certainty, but I kind of think it might be a forgery.
Okay.
I'm not prepared to not like those stones at Galt. Those are real. But even if those are your two examples, those are really just the two examples. I mean, there's not much other stuff. I mean, in Europe, when they had ivory, they do all this carving out of it, right? But they had ivory, and Clovis folks, I mean, they at least occasionally hunted mammoths and mastodons, so they had access to ivory. And yet, we haven't found in the U.S. what they found in the Oregon Nation in the Old World. They just don't do that here, and certainly. Clovis folks were obviously fully modern humans operating with a mind no different than yours and mine. So why isn't it there? Could be a sample size issue. That would be something to consider.
Are they painting the inside of their yurts and things? We just don't see it.
It might be that their form of art doesn't preserve. It could have been all dance. It could have been all body painting. It could have been tattooing.
Yeah.
It could have been music, drumming, things that we can't get to. that's entirely possible. I kind of think that if somebody is doing that kind of art, they're also going to do the kind of art that would leave a record. They'd carve the ivory. They'd carve things into bone. But I'm not certain that that's correct, right? But that's my gut sense that it would be manifested in some substance that we can recover. The other possibility is that those folks, being as fully human and cultural as we are, they're if the purpose of art is to talk about your culture, or to talk about who you are and how you're different than those people over there. So the Aurignacian folks in Europe, those modern humans, may have been producing all this ivory figurines as part of a whole process of talking about, here's who we are, and we're not those guys who look a little different than us, the Neanderthals who live in the next valley over. If Clovis was the first peoples in what's now the continental United States, and I some days when I get up, that's what I think. Other days, I'm not so sure. But they were certainly living in a landscape where population density was very, very low. They couldn't really afford to be pushing people away from themselves. They really had to be socially, intellectually, emotionally pulling people towards themselves, because if they hadn't done that, they would have died out. They would have gone extinct. I mean, small groups can't exist as a self-contained unit reproductively. They need to get spouses from other places. So it may have been that they regarded everyone else on the landscape as just like them. They're us. And so we don't feel the need to sort of talk about our culture and why is it different than what those people are doing, because what those people are doing is exactly what you're doing. And you regard them as exactly like you, and a potential source of spouses and friends and people you can move in with when you can't stand your brother-in-law anymore.
Or you buy a bus. It's pretty profound. Dang. The last question then would be, they weren't making art that we know of and that we can't see. We know for a fact here they were like hitting the protein hard. So like, they made all these tools that we're digging them up. And this year's Laprelle excavations, how does Laprelle fit into what does Laprelle mean for humanity? Like what can we learn from this, and what would we teach people using this site?
For humanity?
Or just the general, like, as a foraging professor, not that you foraged in the dumpster, but like, what am I trying to say? You teach hunter-gatherer ecology. There we go.
I have foraged from dumpsters. I was a graduate student once.
We all were there.
What does it mean for humanity?
Like, does it show us about mobility, something we didn't know? Does it show us like community with like how many people are probably here, or things like that?
When I look at Clovis archaeology in general, and Laprelle is sort of a really well documented example of it. The thing that I see is that humans are probably designed to live in smaller groups than we live in, but we don't have much choice today, right? In a planet of 8 billion people, the only way to live in smaller groups is to, I don't know, kill off 7 billion or so. So, and that seems unpleasant.
No, I mean, yeah, unpleasant.
But that does seem to be the way humans were. It's the environment that we evolved within.
Yeah.
So we should be able to take that lesson and find some way to maybe structure our worlds more so that we live like that, so that you can live in New York City and not feel like you're completely alone, even though you're surrounded by millions of people.
Right.
And there are ways to do that, but it has a lot to do with, things like you have to socially engineer things. And in Europe, they do this. I mean, they build sort of apartment complexes with these interior plaza playground areas that everyone is sort of facing into. It's very much like a hunter-gatherer camp where you have all these huts that all face into the interior, and it all sort of acts to sort of draw people together, right? But the fact that you also need friends in faraway places that you can call upon in times of need. So here it looks like this mammoth, we assume it's hunted, but we don't know that for certain actually. So someone gets a mammoth, and the stone artifacts that we're finding there really look like we've got people coming from different places on the landscape. Consequently, they're bringing with them the kind of stone that's found in that place on the landscape, and they're all coming together here. And I don't know how that would work, how that would happen, whether it's done through some kind of signaling like smoke, or whether somebody kind of sends out the word very, very quickly.
Yeah.
And we've got a mammoth, a lot of meat. We should all get together and have a good time here.
Right.
I don't know how that would happen.
Because they were getting ochre from Guernsey all the way over. That's what, 3 days walk from here?
It's yeah.
Yeah.
A good long ways. Yeah. And some of the stones are coming from different other places on the landscape, so that people are coming from different places.
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah, Bob, it's been really fun talking to you. I appreciate learning from you, and I always like talking with you about this stuff because you're the guy to talk to about it. So.
Well, it's always a pleasure, David. You've always got interesting questions.
I appreciate that. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right. I'm going to go bug spray on my whole body. Sweet. That's fun.
Good job, David.
Thanks.
Bob, are Neanderthals people?
I forgot the audience questions. My bad.
Yes.
How do you know?
Huh?
How do you know?
The reason she's asking this question is because I've for a long time argued that Neanderthals were just like us, just like modern humans, but they weren't cultured. But I have to change my opinion there because of some of the stuff that people have found, like the eagle talons, which are clearly in that new